They thought they had already won. My son had the audacity to sit at my kitchen table, the one I built with my own hands 40 years ago, and tell me that arrangements had been made. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like I was a problem that needed to be managed. I watched him fold his hands on that table, watched his wife nod slowly from the doorway, and I said nothing. I let them believe what they believed. I had learned, a long time ago, from the quietest and most brilliant woman I ever knew, that silence is not weakness. Silence is preparation. My name is Raymond. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years working the line at a paper mill in Beaufort, South Carolina. And before you picture a broken-down old man with nothing left to lose, let me stop you right there. I have everything. I have my health, my mind, my land, and a story that I need to tell you because what happened to me over the past 2 years is something I believe a lot of people need to hear. It starts with my wife, Clara. We met when I was 24, and she was 22. She was working the register at her uncle's hardware store on Bay Street, and I came in to buy a spool of wire and left with her phone number written on the back of my receipt. We married 11 months later in the parking lot of the church we attended because the sanctuary was being renovated and neither one of us wanted to wait. The preacher said God didn't care about the building anyway. Clara said she didn't either. That was her. She never cared about the things most people spent their lives chasing. We had 2 sons. Gerald is the older one, 43 now, and Marcus is 41. I worked hard for both of them. Clara worked hard too, for many years at the county tax assessor's office. She was good with numbers in a way that I never was. I never thought much about it. It was just Clara being Clara. She kept the household accounts. She filed our taxes every year. She tracked every dollar that came in and went out of our lives. I was grateful. I was not curious. That was my first mistake, though, as it turned out. It was also the thing that protected me. Clara was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the late spring of 2 years ago. She lasted 8 months after the diagnosis. I have never experienced anything like those 8 months in my life, not even close, and I do not have the words to describe what it is to watch the person who held your entire world together begin to leave it. She was calm in a way that frightened me. She was organized. She made lists. She had long conversations on the phone that she would end whenever I entered the room, and she would smile at me and say, "I'm just taking care of things, Ray. Don't worry." I did not ask what things. I was too busy being afraid. She passed on a Thursday morning in February, in our bedroom, with my hand in hers. I held on long after the warmth left. I could hear Gerald downstairs on his phone already. I told myself he was calling family to share the news. I chose to believe that. The house filled up by that evening. Gerald and his wife, Denise, arrived first and claimed the master guest bedroom without asking. Marcus drove up from Savannah with his girlfriend. By the time Clara had been gone 12 hours, there were people eating my food, drinking my coffee, and having conversations in hushed voices that stopped whenever I walked into the room. I was 66 years old, and I felt invisible in my own home. The week after the funeral was the worst. Gerald sat me down. He actually sat me down, like I was a child, and told me that he and Denise had been doing some research. He said that at my age, living alone in this house on all this land was simply not practical. He said the property was too much for one person to maintain. He said there were very good facilities in the area that specialized in helping seniors live comfortably and with dignity. Dignity. He used the word dignity while he was suggesting I leave the house where I had lived for 38 years. Denise was standing behind him, and I watched her eyes move around the room as he talked. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the walls, the furniture, the ceilings. She was calculating. I had seen that look before on her face, but I had always chosen not to name it. I named it that day. Marcus said very little. He had always been the quieter of the two, easier to read, and I could see in his eyes that he was uncomfortable. But he did not speak up. He let his brother do the talking. He let his brother do the damage. I told them I needed time. I told them I was still grieving, and this was not the moment for decisions. Gerald nodded like he expected this response and was prepared to be patient. Denise touched my arm and said they just wanted what was best for me. I thanked her. I felt something harden inside me like concrete. They stayed for another week. During that week, Denise organized Clara's closet without my permission. She went through the filing cabinet in the study under the guise of helping me sort through paperwork. She asked me, twice, about the deed to the property. I told her I didn't know where Clara kept it. That was not entirely a lie. I told her Clara handled all of that. After they left, the house was the quietest it had ever been. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, then I got up and went into the study. Because something had been bothering me since the day after the funeral. Something small that I could not stop thinking about. Clara's desk. It was an old roll-top desk that had belonged to her father. She kept it locked with a small key that she wore on her keychain after she passed. I had gathered her things carefully, her phone, her purse, her keychain, and placed them in a small box on the dresser. I had not opened the box. I was not ready, but standing in the doorway of the study, looking at that locked desk, I understood that, ready or not, it was time. The key was brass and small, warm from sitting in my hand. I fitted into the lock, and the roll top slid back smoothly, the way it always had. Clara oiled that desk twice a year. She oiled everything twice a year. Inside was organized the way Clara organized everything. File folders, color-coded, labeled in her neat handwriting. Tax returns going back 20 years. Insurance policies. Utility bills in chronological order. Vehicle titles. And then, toward the back left of the desk, a single folder that was not labeled with a category. It was labeled with just one word, in letters slightly larger than her normal writing. Raymond. My name, in her handwriting. I stood there for a moment with my hand on it before I could open it. Inside the folder was a letter. 4 pages, front and back, in Clara's hand. Beneath the letter were documents, legal-sized papers folded in thirds, several sets of them, paper clipped together with small yellow sticky notes in her writing. Beneath the documents was a business card for an attorney named Patricia Holloway, with a Beaufort address and a handwritten note on the back. She knows everything. Call her Monday. I sat down in Clara's chair. I read the letter first. She started it the way she started most things, without preamble, without softening. Raymond, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're sitting at my desk, which means you're doing exactly what I hoped you would do instead of letting Gerald and Denise handle things. Good. She knew. She had known for years what her older son's wife was. The letter explained everything in the careful, logical way that Clara explained everything. 30 years ago, she had begun quietly purchasing land. Parcels of rural acreage surrounding Beaufort County that had been selling cheap in the 90s and early 2000s because nobody wanted farmland at the time. She had done it through a limited liability company she formed with Patricia Holloway's help. The company was named CRW Holdings, Clara Ruth Whitfield, her full maiden name. She had funded it from a separate account that she opened years before we married, money she had saved herself, and she had grown it methodically over 3 decades by reinvesting the proceeds from timber leases and agricultural easements on the land she acquired. She wrote, I want you to understand that I never kept this from you to deceive you. I kept it from you to protect it. You are the most generous man I have ever known, Ray. And that is a beautiful thing. And it is also the reason I never told you. You would have helped the boys. You would have helped anyone who asked. I needed this to be yours, just yours, for when you needed it most. I read those lines 3 times. Then I read the rest of the letter. Then I looked at the documents. CRW Holdings owned 412 acres of land in Beaufort County. 412 acres. I had lived in this county my entire life and had no idea my wife had been acquiring it 1 parcel at a time for 30 years. But that was not the part that stopped my breathing. The part that stopped my breathing was one of the document sets near the bottom of the stack. A lease agreement. A commercial lease, dated 18 months earlier, 6 months before Clara received her diagnosis between CRW Holdings as lessor and a development company called Coastal Prime Properties LLC as lessee. 63 acres of land leased for a period of 5 years for the purpose of a residential development project. I had to read the signatory line of Coastal Prime Properties twice before it registered. Gerald A. Whitfield, managing member. My son had been leasing land from my wife's company for a year and a half. He did not know who owned it. The lease had been handled entirely through Patricia Holloway's office. The correspondence address for CRW Holdings was the attorney's business address. Gerald had signed a lease, was paying monthly rent, and was currently in the process of developing 63 acres of land that he believed he was simply renting from an anonymous investment company. He had been to my house within 48 hours of his mother's death and suggested I move to a senior living facility. He was paying rent to his mother's estate. My hands were not entirely steady when I picked up Patricia Holloway's business card. I set it face up on the desk, and I looked at the handwritten note on the back. She knows everything. Call her Monday. It was a Saturday. I sat in Clara's chair for the rest of that evening, and I did not call my sons. I did not call anyone. I made myself dinner. I sat at the kitchen table, and I thought about my wife, about the quiet woman who had sat beside me in a parking lot church 39 years ago and promised to love me, and who had spent the 30 years after that building a fortress around me that I didn't even know existed. Monday morning, I called Patricia Holloway at 8 o'clock. She answered on the second ring like she had been waiting. She told me that yes, she had handled Clara's affairs for many years, and yes, she was very sorry for my loss, and yes, she was available to meet that morning if I could come to her office. I drove downtown and sat across from a woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a directness in her manner that reminded me immediately of Clara. She had a full file on the desk between us. She walked me through everything carefully: the holdings, the financials, the lease agreements, the transfer of the LLC's ownership into a trust of which I was the sole beneficiary and trustee. When she finished laying it all out, she folded her hands and looked at me. Mrs. Whitfield told me to expect that you would be quiet through most of this, she said. I told her she was right about that. She also told me to tell you that she was not trying to make decisions for you. She was trying to make sure you had options. She paused. You have quite a few options, Mr. Whitfield. I drove home and I sat with it for 2 weeks. Gerald called 3 times. He used the word facilities twice. Denise called once and asked me how I was managing all that property. Marcus called and talked about other things: his job, his girlfriend, a truck he was thinking about buying. And at the end of the call, he said quietly, almost like he didn't mean for it to come out, "Dad, don't let Gerald push you around." I told him I wouldn't. I did not tell him what I knew. Not yet. The thing that decided me was not Gerald. It was Denise. She called on a Tuesday afternoon, and the call started casually enough, asking how I was eating, whether I was sleeping, the performance of concern that she had been performing for years. Then she shifted to the property, and it was not casual anymore. She said that she and Gerald had been talking, and they felt that it would make sense, practically speaking, for the property to be transferred into Gerald's name sooner rather than later to simplify things, she said, to avoid the mess of probate. She said she had actually already spoken to a real estate attorney about the process. She said they were just trying to protect me. She said the word protect. I told her I would think about it. Then I called Patricia Holloway and told her I was ready. What happened next took about 6 weeks, and Patricia managed most of it. What I learned in those 6 weeks was that Clara had been more thorough than I had understood from the initial review. The deed to our home, the house, the immediate lot, had been placed into the trust as well, transferred years ago. I was the trustee, which meant that our home was not subject to inheritance claims in the way that standard property would be. It was structured, Patricia explained, precisely to prevent what Denise had been describing. The 63 acres Gerald was developing were, of course, where the more immediate situation presented itself. Gerald's monthly lease payment was already 2 days overdue when Patricia sent the formal notice of ownership transfer. The notice went to Coastal Prime Properties LLC, informing them that CRW Holdings had transferred all assets and management to a new trustee. that the trustee had conducted a review of all outstanding lease agreements, and that a meeting was requested to discuss the terms of the existing lease on the 63-acre parcel. I am told that Gerald called Patricia Holloway's office 4 times in the 24 hours after receiving that notice. I am told that he was not calm during those calls. He called me on a Thursday evening. His voice was different than it had been in all the months before, flatter, stripped of the practiced patience he usually performed with me. He asked me if I had known about this. I told him that Clara had taken care of things, and that I was only now beginning to understand how well. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked what I intended to do. I told him I intended to honor the existing lease, because it was a fair lease at fair market rate, and because I was not in the business of disrupting legitimate business arrangements. I told him that when the lease came up for renewal, we would sit down like reasonable adults and discuss terms. He said, "Dad," I said, "Gerald." He didn't have anything else to say after that. Neither did I, for a moment. Then I told him something I had been thinking about for weeks. I told him that I knew what Denise had asked me about signing the property over. I told him I understood why she asked, and I was not angry. But I told him that what I found in his mother's desk had taught me something important that I should have understood a long time ago. That quiet people are not empty people. That a person who doesn't argue is not a person who doesn't see. I told him his mother had seen everything for 30 years, and she had responded, not with anger, but with preparation. He didn't say anything. I told him I was going to be all right. After we hung up, I sat on the back porch with a glass of iced tea and looked out at the land behind the house. The old pine trees at the edge of the property line. The last of the light going orange over the rooftops. Clara had looked at this view 10,000 times. She had sat in this same chair. I understood, sitting there, that the view was different when you knew what was on the other side of those pine trees. When you knew how far the land went. When you knew that someone who loved you had spent 30 years making sure you would never lose it. Marcus drove up the following Saturday. He came alone, without his girlfriend, and he sat with me on the back porch for most of the afternoon. He was the one who finally said what I think he had been trying to say for a long time, that he had known, for years, that Denise saw their parents as an asset to be managed, that he had been ashamed of not saying so sooner, that he was sorry. I told him not to carry it. I told him his mother had handled it. He laughed a little at that, and I could hear Clara in his laugh, the specific sound of finding something both funny and completely unsurprising. I have thought a lot, in the months since, about what my wife did and why she did it the way she did it. I have thought about why she never told me, and I have come to believe that she was right not to. Not because I would have mismanaged it. I would like to think I would not have, but because the secrecy was, itself, the protection. What Gerald and Denise did not know existed, they could not pressure me to give away. What I did not know existed, I could not accidentally reveal. Clara understood something about human nature that took me until I was 66 years old to fully grasp. That the most powerful protection is invisible. She was not hiding from me. She was hiding for me. The lease renewal came up 4 months ago. Gerald and I sat across from each other at Patricia Holloway's conference table, Gerald with his own attorney, me with Patricia, and we negotiated like strangers, which in some ways we were becoming. The terms of the new lease were fair. They were also non-negotiable. Gerald agreed to them. He looked at me at the end of the meeting with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something that was not quite respect and not quite resentment, but was somewhere between the two and moving. I thought, toward the first one slowly. Denise was not at that meeting. She has not called me since. I am not bitter about any of it. I want to be clear about that, because I think when people hear a story like this one, they wait for the anger. And the anger is there in the background. Yes, I would be lying if I said it was not, but it is not the thing that drives me. What drives me is the other thing. The thing I feel when I walk the back perimeter of the property on Sunday mornings, which I have started doing since all of this began. 412 acres. I do not see all of it. I am 68, not 28, but I walk far enough to remind myself that it is there. Clara walked every inch of it over 30 years. She walked it in pieces, at different times, probably on weekday afternoons when I assumed she was doing errands. I imagine her walking the pine lines and the creek beds and the low country marsh grass, checking her land the way a person checks on something they built, quietly and without needing anyone to see them do it. I imagine her satisfied. I keep the folder she left me in the locked roll-top desk. I added her letter to it, slipped it back inside the folder with my name on it. I oil the desk twice a year. There are things I would say to her if I could. There are things I said to her chair before I understood that was not how it worked, that she was not in the chair, she was not in the house. She was out there in the land, and the legal documents, and the 30 years of careful decisions, and the 4 pages of her handwriting telling me not to worry. I said them anyway. To anyone watching this, who is where I was, who feels invisible in their own life, who has been told in so many quiet ways that they are a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I want you to hear what Clara spent 30 years trying to tell me. The people who underestimate you are counting on you to believe them. Don't. Whatever they think you are not that. Whatever they think you don't have, check the desk, check the locked drawer, check the folder with your name on it in the handwriting of someone who knew you better than you knew yourself. It may take a while to find, but it is there. And when you find it, everything changes. My name is Raymond. I am 68 years old. I walk my land on Sunday mornings. I am not going anywhere.